Good afternoon, everyone. Are we ready? Is the mic on? Good afternoon. Welcome to the Atlantic Council. It's a real pleasure to have all of you with us. My name's Damon Wilson. I'm Executive Vice President here at the Atlantic Council, and I'm really pleased to welcome just an extraordinary group of guests, a great audience, and a much larger online audience to be with us for what I think is an important discussion at a vitally important time for Europe, for the United States, for our transatlantic relationship. So today we will be talking to the three speakers of Parliament from Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, nations that find themselves on the front line of freedom. This has been part of an ongoing strategy here at the Atlantic Council over the past couple of years to work with these nations together in terms of their aspirations to move to the West, to join Europe, and to strengthen their relationship with the United States. So I'm going to ask that all of you join the conversation as well as those all online by using the hashtag ACEurasia, but also hashtag Frontline of Freedom. We're delighted to host the speakers of Parliament from these countries. In the days of the Soviet Union, many of you will be familiar with the term that Americans often use to describe these peoples as captive nations. Well, today, these people are no longer captive nations. Today, we celebrate their liberty, their independence, their own identity. And yet I think all of us know in this room that we have a lot of unfinished business that still stands. In many respects, we talk about this at the Atlantic Council as countries whose aspirations to determine their own future are sometimes held hostage by the occupations that they face on their territories, by the conflicts that they faced on their territories, in terms of Russia's presence on their land. Unfinished business of achieving full sovereignty, territorial integrity, and unleashing their aspirations to move towards Europe and the West. In fact, sometimes we hear this term of people talking about a gray zone between east of NATO and the European Union and Russia, west of Russia. And I think that is very much a concept that we are working to eliminate here in our work at the Atlantic Council. That's a concept in many respects that implies perpetual instability, a lack of identity, and instead, we want to focus on their ability to determine their own future as free, whole, and secure European states. It's why today we're talking about these countries together, because they sit today on a front line of freedom that runs from the Barents Sea to the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. And despite substantial challenges stemming from a history of the Soviet period, from ongoing Kremlin interference in their affairs, occupation on their territories, these countries, their peoples, have tried to choose a path of economic and political reform that moves them ever increasingly closer to Europe, to the West. And yet each faces tremendous challenges at home. We watch the constant tug of war and the tension on dealing with corruption in Ukraine. We've just seen a collapse of a government in Georgia and debate about the way forward there. We've seen contested local elections in Moldova playing out in the most recent elections in Chisinau. These issues are front and center as the peoples of these countries struggle at home with their own reforms. But it's a testament, I think, to the three guests that we have today, the speakers of Parliament, that they recognize the common security challenges that each of their countries faced. And as such, they've come together increasingly as speakers of Parliament to bring their countries together, to promote this idea of a joint forum, to advance their common view of cooperation together and within, and to grow and build their relationships externally. I think it's why, under the leadership of Ambassador John Herbst and our Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center, that we were honored to help play a role in helping to arrange some of the previous parliamentary interactions with the speakers, working hand in hand with the first gathering and the speakers' event in Chisinau, Moldova in March, followed by their gathering around the Independence Day celebrations in Georgia and Tbilisi, and then earlier, most recently in June, in Kiev, where each of our guests have served as hosts over time. And I think today we see this as a culmination, their visit to the United States, their meeting with Speaker Ryan, to bring that message of the three working together in common cause here. And we look forward to continuing this major discussion in Washington as we look forward to our own convening in October on a conference focused on the Frontlines of Freedom. So the three speakers are visiting Washington as part of a larger delegation of speakers from across Europe, holding important meetings up on Capitol Hill. Speaker Ryan, members of Congress, the administration. And I think many of you know them today, but I'll just briefly introduce Chairman Irakli Kobakidze of Georgia, elected as chairman of the parliament in November 2016, also serves as the executive secretary for the Georgian Dream Democratic Georgia Party, previously had roles with the UN Development Program, Open Society Georgia Foundation, the Council of Europe Representative Office to Georgia, and USAID. Has been a frequent guest here at the Atlantic Council, just as his colleague, Speaker Andrian Candu of Moldova, who was elected as Speaker of Parliament in January 2015, also serves as the Vice President of the Democratic Party, and before this had several years serving as a Member of Parliament, Deputy Speaker of Parliament, a Deputy Prime Minister with extensive experience in the private sector, and last but not least, our good friend and colleague, Chairman Andriy Pradoby of Ukraine, who was elected Chairman of the Rada in April 2016. Prior to this, having served as first Deputy Chairman of the Rada and Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council. He was one of the leaders of the Euromaidan, where he did some very early events with us, broadcasting live from the Maidan to our Atlantic Council audience. All have been guests here before at the Atlantic Council, but we're delighted to welcome them together as guests in this common cause. I'm going to hand over the stage to our able convener moderator today. We're delighted to have Dr. Michael Carpenter with us. Mike Carpenter is a well-known colleague in this part of the world. He's currently serving as director of the Penn Biden Center for Diplomacy and Global Engagement, in addition to being a senior fellow here at the Atlantic Council and our Eurasia Center. And he's held many positions in the State Department and the Defense Department, and of course as foreign policy advisor to Vice President Biden, director for Russia at the NSC, that makes him a veteran on many of these issues. So I want to thank again all of you for joining us. I'm delighted that we're joined by our ambassadors, who are our great colleagues here of these countries, some new ambassadors as well. So we're delighted to have you with us, as well as a strong representation from the Atlantic Council Board. Bob, George, we're delighted to have you here as supporters of our work in this region. This is going to be a wide-ranging discussion focusing on the common goals and how we can best partner to combat Russian malign influence in the region, and how to ensure that Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine can continue on a further path of European integration. So today's event for us is not a one-off event. This is part of the ongoing Council strategy to help support the reforms within these countries, to strengthen our hand in making the case for them coming home to a European family of nations in the transatlantic community. With that, let me invite Mike Carpenter to the stage and the speakers to follow, and we'll begin the program. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Damon. It is my pleasure and honor to be here moderating this discussion with the three speakers of Parliament of Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. Damon has just laid out the trajectory of their various joint meetings. They just had a meeting in Washington today with Speaker Ryan. They have collaborated on a number of issues, discussing their common challenges, both internal and external, and potentially solutions, common solutions that they could apply in each of these countries. What I'm going to do here as part of this discussion is ask each of the speakers to make brief introductory comments. I will then moderate a discussion with them, and then lastly, I will open up the floor to questions from you in the audience. So I encourage you to start filing away those questions for later. But I'm going to start with you, Speaker Kobakidze. If you could say a few words about the importance of this trilateral format, why you're here in Washington, why this matters to have three countries facing Russian aggression together, discussing the same set of challenges together.
Thank you so much. It's an honor for me to speak at this distinguished audience, to speak at the Atlantic Council, which is a very experienced organization, which is a great lobbyist of the Euro-Atlantic relations and the Euro-Atlantic integration of our three countries. We attach special importance to the cooperation between our three countries, between Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. We have quite common challenges, which is mostly related to the regional problems and challenges, to the Russian aggression. We, all three countries, have a problem with the territorial integrity. Our regions in Georgia, Abkhazia, and Sakhalin Valley region are occupied, and the countries, Ukraine and Moldova, have the similar problems with the territorial integrity. That is one reason why it is important for us to unite our resources and to fight jointly for the protection of our interests and for the protection of the core principles of international law. But besides the common challenges, we have also the common goals, and we share the common values. Our common goal, which we share with both countries, is European integration, and another goal for Georgia, which we share with Ukraine, is the integration with NATO. We are quite consistent in our efforts to become the full-fledged members of the European Union and of NATO. That is our top priority, which is also a formalized priority for Georgia. We have formalized this top international foreign policy priorities in a special parliamentary resolution. We have adopted this resolution shortly after the parliamentary elections in 2016. And this document says that, again, the European integration and the Euro-Atlantic integration are the top priorities in terms of Georgia's foreign policy. Besides, this document says that the United States is the key strategic partner, the main strategic partner for Georgia. It means that we have a very clear vision in terms of our foreign policy. Again, we have a very clear goals, which is related to the European integration and the Euro-Atlantic integration. And again, we have a very strong strategic partnership with the United States. This is something which is a kind of red line for us. Also with regard to the relations with the Russian Federation. You know that we are pursuing a pragmatic policy with the Russian Federation. But with this pragmatic policy, we have a very clear red lines, which is connected with the Western integration and which is also connected with the deoccupation of our two regions. We are actively pursuing our non-recognition policy. The occupation is the main national issue and the main national goal for Georgia, and we should be very consistent in our efforts. As for the policy towards the Russian Federation, again, we faced a strong aggression from the side of this country. We are again pursuing a pragmatic policy, and with this pragmatic policy, we managed to achieve a much higher grade of our stability, domestic stability and domestic security, and we now even contribute to a broader regional stability and security. So that is the role which now Georgia plays in our region. But we have, of course, quite serious challenges, especially in the occupied regions. The human rights situation is grave, both in Abkhazia and Sakhalin Valley region. The humanitarian situation is not good, and our citizens which are living in Abkhazia and Sakhalin Valley region are facing serious problems on a daily basis. The kidnapping of people happens on a regular basis. Recently, one of the Georgian citizens, a peaceful citizen of Georgia, was killed in the Sakhalin Valley region, which demonstrates once again that this conflict, which we face in Abkhazia and Sakhalin Valley region, and the situation is there is not just a frozen conflict. Sometimes the people forget that this conflict brings the deaths of the people on a daily basis, the human rights violations. That's why it is very important for us to attract the attention of the international community to this problem. Again, it is not a frozen conflict. It is a conflict which brings the deaths and which brings the kidnapping and other human rights violations of peaceful citizens on a daily basis. Since we face the common challenges and since we have the common goals and more importantly, we share the common values with our Ukrainian and Moldovan friends, it is again very important for us to have the joint efforts, to plan jointly our efforts in terms of addressing the challenges related to the Russian aggression and in terms of achieving our foreign policy goal. And we have launched a very successful cooperation, especially in a parliamentary format, together with my two colleagues, the speakers from Ukraine and Moldova. And finally, this cooperation led to the establishment of a parliamentary assembly of three nations of Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. And I think that this will be a very successful format in future. We have had several meetings in a trilateral format. Now we are visiting the United States, and it was quite important for us to voice our joint messages in front of our American colleagues, and I believe that this was a very successful visit. And in September, in the second half of September, we will organize a parliamentary assembly, the first session of the parliamentary assembly in Tbilisi, which will again launch a very successful the process of cooperation between our three countries. I would like to thank my colleagues from Moldova and Ukraine for their efforts, for their enthusiasm, and I believe that with our joint efforts we will finally achieve our common goals. It will not be easy. It will not be easy to achieve our foreign policy goals, the EU integration, NATO integration. It will not happen within the next couple of years, unfortunately, but we will be consistent in our efforts. We will implement the relevant reforms. Finally, we are implementing these reforms not just for becoming the member of the EU or NATO. We are implementing these reforms in order to strengthen our statehood, in order to strengthen our democracy, in order to strengthen our economy. And with this consistency and with this enthusiasm, finally, we believe that we will become the full-fledged member of the Western family of nations. And the most important thing for us is the approximation. And under the approximation, we mean not only the institutional approximation with EU and NATO. First of all, we mean the approximation in terms of values. We should strengthen the democracy, we should strengthen our societies in order to fully share the values on which the European and the Euro-Atlantic families of nations are based. The decision to become the NATO member, EU member, is a value-based decision of our people. The enthusiasm among the Georgian population is very high, and with this high motivation, with this high enthusiasm and high support to the idea of Western integration, we believe that finally our goals will be achieved in strong cooperation with our friends from Moldova and Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, Speaker Candu, you launched this process in Chisinau with your hospitality on March 1st of this year. You hosted the other two speakers, and yet Moldova is a little different. Moldova is not aspiring to NATO membership. It's militarily neutral. What do you see coming out of this cooperation with your colleagues? And can you speak a little bit more also about the Interparliamentary Assembly and what you hope to achieve through this trilateral format?
Thank you, Michael. Indeed, well, the idea did not come the 1st of March in Chisinau. It came a little bit earlier. If I remember well, we were in Warsaw, three of us, and already sharing some thoughts and ideas. And we came to a conclusion that a good cooperation between three countries could actually be based on two reasons. First, it's about the implementation of the association agreement with the European Union, which all three countries we have, because we are members of the Eastern Partnership Program of European Union. And we go through quite similar reforms. And we have the same goal, it's the European Union, to become members of European Union. And when speaking about the reforms or the achievements, we can share good practices, best practices, we can share experience, and we can share knowledge. And I will give you a couple of examples. For example, Ukraine went very well, and they approved a very good reform in public procurements, one of the best in the region, based on electronic trade. Georgia went very well in everything which means the business environment and attracting the investments. We have as well some of the achievements in fighting against corruption in integrity package of banking financial regulations, working with IMF. So these are quite good stories to share. We have reforms in judiciary, in energy sector, in banking financial, in mass media. So all this can help us working together and from a legislative point of view, share, including the ideas in the legislation, share experience, get the best practices for the implementation. The second reason is, of course, Russia and the confrontation that we have. In all three countries, we face the same challenges because of the occupied territories in the three countries. Moldova has occupied territory from 1992. It's about the Transnistria. So we already have an experience. And this experience we can share with our colleagues in Ukraine and in Georgia. What kind of mistakes we made maybe during the 25 years in dealing with Transnistria, or maybe at the international level. What maybe should Ukrainians take care in the future in dealing with the eastern part of Ukraine or Crimea? Georgia the same with Abkhazia and Ossetia. Moreover, hybrid war and informational technologies, cyber attacks, propaganda, or everything which is known as the fake news. It's something that Russia is using against our countries and many other Western countries. So Moldova, for example, found a way from a legislative point of view to ban the broadcast of the talk shows or the informative programs and those with military character. Maybe this is a good experience to share also with other countries, including the Baltic states, which are also dealing and facing the challenges in this way. Then energy. We're talking about energy security. Ukraine now is very much with other countries as well as Moldova. It's an agreement. We are against Nord Stream 2 because we believe that this is not a commercial project. This is a pure political project which is used by Russia to influence, and this is actually a weapon. And I will not forget and I will give you an example how Russia is using the energy as a weapon. In Moldova a couple of years ago came the former deputy prime minister of Russia Federation, known as Dmitry Rogozin. And if everybody watched the Game of Thrones, there is a word that winter is coming. So he was saying after Moldova signed the association agreement, he said, well, Moldovans, winter is coming, you might be cold. So what kind of relationship is this, and what is the Russia using the energy as the tool to influence and to have impact on all the free countries? So all these challenges faced by us, as well as the reforms that we are running on our difficult sometimes path to the European Union, all this is a sign for us to be solidar, to have this regional cooperation, and therefore we came with this idea to set up the assembly, the parliamentary assembly between three countries. And the first, we have set up the assembly in Kiev 3 weeks ago, and the first session will be held in Georgia and Tbilisi the beginning of September, where we might come already with some ideas which we can also talk today. For example, is to set up a unique strategic center for coordination to counter the Russian influence in any area, but including in the hybrid war. So it's something which NATO, for example, similarly has in many countries, like Stratcom called, or United Kingdom set it up under the UK Parliament. So a good experience that we can share also with our colleagues from the Baltic states, from Poland, from Romania, because we are indeed at the front line. And we should understand, and everybody should understand, that if Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova fail, then there is a big danger also for other countries which are now in European Union and also member states of the NATO. There is only less than 100 kilometers from Transnistria, from Tiraspol, to the border of European Union and NATO. And we still have illegal military troops of Russia Federation stationed in Moldova, which sometimes are breaching the security zones, very often simulating and attempting to cross the river by breaching all the international tools and instruments that we have. And even during the last week, Moldova, I would say, achieved a very big, there is a big achievement, because the United Nations General Assembly approved a resolution for Moldova against Russian Federation, requiring to withdraw the Russian troops. Well, during that specific day, there were very big movements of the military machines and the equipment and of the soldiers in Transnistria, without any signs, without notifications, breaching all the instruments that we have agreed for these 25 years. So I think in this cooperation, and it says that when you are alone, you might not be so strong, but if you are free, definitely you are stronger. And free voices, the same message, free countries, the same message, the same actions. This is, I think, a very good achievement, and actually this is the purpose also coming here to Washington, meeting the leadership of the Washington, and including the House of Representatives, Speaker Ryan, other high representatives from the House of Representatives and the Senate. Good discussions here, and we thank very much the United States for the entire support and for understanding of in which region we live and what difficulties we are facing of.
Thank you. So, Speaker Parubi, all three countries have territory that is occupied by Russian forces. Ukraine, however, is unique in that you are still right now in the throes of a hot war with Russia. Your people, your civilians, your military positions are being fired upon every day, artillery, mortars, multiple rocket launchers, etc. How does this format help you to make your case for why Ukraine needs Western support in conjunction with your colleagues from Moldova and Georgia? The floor is yours.
Дякую вам і хочу подякувати перш за все за запрошення взяти участь в цій конференції.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to take part in this conference.
З часів Шеренбо і Майдану дуже теплі відносини і зв'язки з Атлантичною Радою.
Since the Maidan and Revolution of Dignity time, and I have had, and since the time when I was Secretary of the National Security Defense Council, I have very good relationship and warm relation, I would say, with the Atlantic Council.
Тут я знаходив найглибше розуміння тих процесів, які відбуваються і в Україні, і в Східній Європі.
And here I could learn very important insights into processes which are unfolding both in Ukraine and in Eastern Europe.
І ви дуже правильно зазначили, що сьогодні в Україні є гарячий етап війни.
And you have very correctly pointed out that we are going through a hot stage of war.
Але чому ми тут троє?
But why are we here, three of us? Why are we here?
Тому що ми пам'ятаємо 92-й рік, коли російські війська окупували частину Молдови.
We remember 1992 when Russian troops occupied part of Moldova.
Тому що ми пам'ятаємо 8-й рік, коли весь світ завмер і спостерігав, як російські танки заходили в Грузію.
We also remember 2008 when the whole world was watching as the Russian tanks were rolling into Georgia.
І наші президенти і України, і Польщі поїхали в Грузію, щоб стати на площі і сказати Путін стоп.
And our presidents from our country, the president of Ukraine and the president of Poland, went to Georgia in order to go out in downtown Georgia on the square and say that we support Georgia.
Чому з нами в цій поїздці був спікер і Литви, і спікер Польщі?
Also, why were we joined in this trip by speakers from also Lithuania and Poland?
Тому що вони точно знають.
Because they know for sure.
Якщо не встоїть Україна, наступними будуть країни Балтії, а потім Польща.
So if Ukraine falls, then the next in line is going to be Baltic states and then Poland.
Ми разом, тому що всі країни мають частину окупованих територій.
And we are together also because each of our country has part of its territory occupied.
І тому що Україна веде, власне, гарячий етап війни, коли кожного дня гинуть наші хлопці і дівчата.
And also Ukraine is now going through a hot war when on a daily basis we witness loss of life and our boys and girls perish.
Ми відчуваємо особливу відповідальність.
And that is why we feel our personal responsibility.
І наш приїзд – це формулювання важливого повідомлення.
So our visit here is about a very important message.
Нема окремого конфлікту Росії і Грузії.
So there isn't any such thing as a separate conflict between Georgia and Russia.
І нема окремого конфлікту Молдова-Росія.
There is no separate conflict between Moldova and Russia.
І наші хлопці в Україні помирають не тільки за Україну.
And our boys in Ukraine are dying not just for Ukraine.
Ми хочемо сказати, що Путін кинув виклик всьому цивілізованому і вільному світу.
We want to say that Putin has challenged the whole civilized world.
Він хоче змінити світовий порядок,
So he would like to change the world order,
який протягом довшого часу, протягом 2 поколінь, утримував весь євроатлантичний простір від воєн у великій мірі завдяки зусиллям США.
so the world order which kept the whole world out of trouble, and very much also due to the great contribution of the United States.
В Путіна маніакальна ідея відновити такий вплив на Європу, який мав Кремль за часів Радянського Союзу.
And Putin is possessed by and driven by a maniacal idea that the influence which was wielded by the former Soviet Union over that space should be restored.
І його агресія, його атака – це не тільки танки і автомати.
And his aggression and his attacks are not just about tanks and Kalashnikov rifles.
Ми бачимо його агресію в сферах енергетичній, інформаційній, в кібербезпеці.
And we see his aggression in energy, in information warfare, in cyber attacks.
Свідченням цього вплив на вибори через кібератаки в різних країнах світу.
And one of the manifestations of that also interference into elections through cyber attacks in different countries of the world.
Північний потік-2 – це є частина агресивної політики Російської Федерації.
And the Nord Stream 2 project is part of the aggressive policies of the Russian Federation,
З бажанням дестабілізувати Європу.
based on the desire to destabilize Europe.
Хімічна атака Великобританії проти Скрипаля – це теж елемент глобальної війни, яку Путін веде проти вільного світу.
And the chemical attack in the United Kingdom against Skripal is also part of the big war pursued by Moscow against the whole world.
Але, напевно, найбільша війна йде інформаційна.
But perhaps the biggest warfare which is taking place is the information one.
Методика гібридної війни визначає, що інформаційна атака є завданням номер 1 для ведення цієї війни.
And the methodology of a hybrid war determines that information warfare is priority number 1,
Тому що ця війна йде, перш за все, за серця і розуми людей.
because this war is pursued first of all for the hearts and minds of people,
Танки приходять потім.
and tanks roll in afterwards.
І наше завдання повідомити від наших 3 країн, ми не сіра зона.
And so our task, our assignment here is to bring home the message that we are not a gray zone.
Ми не країни проблеми.
We are not problematic countries.
Ми ті, що на передовій вільного світу.
So we are the countries that are at the forefront of the free world.
А наші вояки – це є щит Європи.
And our soldiers are our countries are the shield of Europe.
І це добре розуміють наші сусіди з Балтії і з Польщі.
And this is well appreciated by our neighbors in the Baltic states and Poland.
Що якщо Путіна не зупинити, його агресія буде йти далі.
So unless Putin is stopped, then his aggression will continue.
Деякі європейські країни сьогодні говорять, що дуже втомилися від наших країн, від України.
Some European countries saying today that they have a fatigue produced by our countries and by Ukraine.
Я питаюся від них, а від Путіна ви не втомилися?
So and I ask them, don't you feel any Putin's fatigue?
І, на жаль, інформаційна війна, яка ведеться в першу чергу проти наших країн,
And unfortunately, this information warfare, which is led against our countries,
інколи дає результат.
unfortunately, that warfare sometimes does produce results.
І наше завдання змінити цей кут зору.
And our task is to change that perspective
Назвати загрозу її правильним іменем.
and also to call a threat.
Ми країни, які є під ударом.
So we are the countries which today are under an impact,
Але цілі Путіна набагато дальші.
but Putin's objectives are by far more far-reaching.
І ми точно знаємо, де є наш самий надійний і твердий союзник.
And we're also quite sure where our most reliable and our firmest ally is.
Це Сполучені Штати Америки.
That is the United States of America.
І тому ми тут, в Вашингтоні,
That is why we're here in Washington, D.C.,
знаючи, що тут розуміють нашу боротьбу,
and knowing that people here understand what our struggle is about.
і розуміють глибину загрози.
And people here appreciate the depth of the threat.
І тому ми звертаємося за спільною позицією по Північному потоку-2, щоб закрити цей проект.
And that is why we urge people here as far as the Nord Stream 2 project is concerned, and we ask that this project should be closed down.
І тому ми ініціюємо створення спільного стратегічного центру по протидії гібридній агресії Росії.
And we also initiate the establishment of a common strategic center to counter Russian hybrid warfare.
І нам дуже важливо, що ці ідеї не тільки сприймаються, а цілковито підтримуються Сполучених Штатів Америки.
That is also, it's extremely important for us that these ideas are not just understood, but they are supported by the United States.
І ми твердо знаємо, будучи разом, ми зуміємо скимати агресію.
And we know for sure that while we stand together, we'll be able to withstand aggression.
Ми зможемо пройти шлях і в ЄС, і в НАТО.
And we'll be able to go all the way towards the EU and the NATO.
І ми знаємо, що у нас і спільне майбутнє.
And we also know that we have a common future.
І ми знаємо, що отримаємо підтримку і соратництво Сполучених Штатів Америки.
And we also know that we'll get support and solidarity from the United States.
Дякую.
Thank you.
Thank you. So you raised an interesting point, which is that under the face of unrelenting information warfare, all three of your countries have been portrayed in some senses as problematic in one way or another. Which brings me to a point that I want to raise with you, Speaker Kobakidze. I want to step back a little bit. Take us back to Georgia of the early 90s, when, frankly, the country was coming apart at the seams. You had Mkhedrioni paramilitaries roaming the country. You had ethnic strife. Corruption was rampant. Things were very dire. People were talking even about a failed state, without exaggeration. And yet today, you find yourself with an economy growing at 5%, investment last year, if I'm not mistaken, at about $1.8 billion, 3.5 million tourists last year. What accounts for this?
More than 7 million.
More than 7. Even better. And I account for at least one of those. So tell me, what accounts for this tremendous turnaround? Talk about the trajectory that Georgia has gone through since the 90s, because I think this is often lost in this discussion about the current problems. And we'll get to those in a second, but talk about this trajectory.
We were facing the specific problems after the restoration of independence, and of course the Russian side was also doing some preparatory works for this case when the 14 republics had to gain the independence, and finally the outcome of this preparatory work was the problems in 2 occupied regions, but also the economic problems that our country was facing. The Georgian economy was very much dependent on the broader Soviet economy, and that's why the collapse of the Soviet Union led to the collapse of the economic system, and of course this created the problems for all the different republics, including Georgia. So that's why we had quite dramatic economic problems from the early 90s, and more importantly, we had this problem with the separatist movements supported by the Russian Federation, and finally it led to the occupation of 2 historic regions of Georgia, of Abkhazia and Tkhinvali region. But I think that I was talking about the values and about the importance of the values for our peoples, and I think that we are following the values on which our society is based. We are essentially an essential part of the Western community of nations. We believe we are the essential part of the European community of nations. That is our historic destiny, we believe, and this kind of belief, this kind of target, with this target we managed to finally step by step improve the situation, to improve the economic situation, to improve the political situation. And now we are much more experienced than our society was in early 90s. We were lacking experience, we were lacking political experience, economic experience. In the Soviet Union, there was no politics, no economic life, no social life in the modern and Western sense. So that's why with the lack of experience we got huge problems. But finally, with the support of the Western community, of the United States, of the European nations, we managed to gain this experience. We managed to implement the relevant reforms. We managed to essentially change the situation in terms of the political life, economic life, and we managed to develop our societies. And in order, we managed to also develop the better recognition of the values in our society. So finally, step by step, we managed to achieve huge progress, dramatic progress, and we are now on the same. So we have a right track, and we are. Our path is quite correct, and still we are facing challenges, but we are progressing. We are progressing permanently. We had some significant problems before 2012, before our government came into power, especially in terms of human rights protection, in terms of democracy, separation of powers, but especially after 2012, we managed to essentially improve also the situation in this respect in terms of democracy, human rights protection. And now we can already compete in terms of the democratic development, human rights protection, even with some new nations. And that is a great achievement. And we have to protect this achievement. And in this slide, of course, the Russian aggression is again quite relevant. We are facing the challenges with regard to the Russian propaganda in Georgia. We have less problems compared to our friends. I would say that in Georgia, the support to the idea of Western integration is very high, even higher compared to the most of the European Union countries. Around 70% of Georgians, according to the opinion polls, strongly support both the NATO integration and EU integration, which is a very good success. And as for the election results, more than 90% of Georgian voters voted for the pro-EU and pro-NATO political parties, which means that the situation is quite good in terms of the population support to the idea of Western integration, but we should be careful, and we should take measures in order to address the relevant challenges. And of course, if our efforts will be united with our friends from Moldova and the Ukraine, we can be even more successful in terms of fighting the Russian propaganda. Again, currently the situation is good. Most of the political parties, media institutions, NGOs, other important stakeholders are pro-Western, so that's why we are facing more or less less challenges, I would say, but still one should be careful, and we should implement very concrete measures in order to address this important challenge.
So before I turn to Speaker Candu, if I could just follow up with you, because thank you for that overview of the trajectory, but there have been recently large numbers of people out in the streets protesting in Georgia, which largely with regards to issues pertaining to rule of law and justice. There were 2 teenagers who were killed. Mm-hmm. The verdict was seen as unjust, and you had tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people out in the streets of Tbilisi. To me, this signifies a healthy civil society that is seized with the issue of fairness and justice. How do you see these protests, and what is the government planning to do with this energy that is out there in the streets that is dissatisfied with the status quo?
I was talking about the development of the society, and also this protest demonstrates the development of the society, but also development of the political culture in Georgia. We had, again, dramatic problems before 2012 with regard to human rights protection and democracy, but after such protests, none of the officials or none of the politicians resigned. In this case, there was a protest, and even under the protest, which was not kind of that there was a protest related to the investigation of one of the criminal cases, and there was a kind of question marks with regard to this investigation, and even under the question marks it was not kind of proven that there was a kind of misbehavior in the activities of the prosecutor's office. The prosecutor general resigned, which means that we are much more advanced in terms of the culture in the society. The society is very sensitive towards even any doubt of the violation of human rights or in any misbehavior of the prosecutor's office or other law enforcement bodies, which is a very good achievement. And we highly respect this protest, and we highly respect this sensitive attitude of the population to the possible violation of human rights. And again, the resignation of the Prosecutor General demonstrated that we are much more advanced in terms of the political culture. Besides, we have also established a special parliamentary investigation commission. Under the previous government, it never happened that the government established any kind of parliamentary investigation commissions, and it happened for the very first time in Georgia that we have established a special parliamentary investigation commission, and we even granted the majority in the investigation commission to the opposition in order to demonstrate that we have nothing to hide, and it is in our primary interest to investigate this case, which we had absolutely different experience under the previous government before 2012 without any investigation commissions and without any readiness to investigate even the most sensitive cases. Now the Prosecutor General resigned, which demonstrates again the much higher political culture. We have created the investigation commission with the majority of the minority, and the commission, again, we are much more advanced, and this is another demonstration of the progress that our society and our state has achieved so far.
Thank you. So, Speaker Candu, I feel sometimes that Moldova, amongst the countries on the front lines of freedom facing Russian aggression, is the one that's often sometimes left out a little bit, forgotten or left behind by Western policymakers. And yet you face unrelenting pressure in terms of TV propaganda coming from Russia, in terms of the presence of Russian troops in Transnistria, in terms of your energy dependence. If I'm not mistaken, you're 100% dependent in the natural gas field on Russian supplies. If you had to tell Western policymakers in a very concise way what the top 3 things that they should be doing for Moldova, what would they be? What should the West be doing more of that it's not doing in Moldova to help secure that Western trajectory for the country?
Well, the West should understand that to stay engaged stronger and stronger in Moldova, in all the processes of transformation of Moldova is the most important. We go through a difficult period of time of building the institutions, building the legislation, making the rule of law to be a rule of law and the law above everything. This takes time. Let's take an example of Romania. In 1994, Romania signed the association agreement and became the member of European Union, if I'm not wrong, in 2007. So it took like 13 years of the association to the European Union. In the context then, the European Union was developing and extending, and Romania, comparing to Moldova, has five times more the population and the resources. So it's taking time. And unfortunately, during the previous period of time, Moldova, I think, made a mistake because Moldova did not have a proper vision and a strategy. We were always trying to balance between the East and West, to play with Russia, not to upset Russia. Although we are occupied territory by Russia Federation, and we are, as you said, 100% dependent on the Russian gas, and at the same time to play around with European Union, but not really to engage, stronger engage. Only 4 years ago it changed. 4 years ago, Moldova have signed the association agreement and DCFTA, Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Agreement with European Union, and switched from the east to the west with clear way to become member of European Union. Takes time to change the mentality of people. Takes time to change the style of thinking and being. And I will give you an example. Before 2014, 2014, Moldova was exporting to Russia more than 65% of all the goods. Wine, fruits, vegetables, name it. When we signed the association agreement, Russia Federation, friendly, have imposed an embargo on all the goods. So we were at the beginning in a very difficult position, because all the exports were stopped. So we had the companies failing, bankrupting, just because they could not find in a very short period of time new markets. But we took this crisis as an opportunity. And in 1 year, 2 years, all the farmers and all the business started to switch and to look for the new markets of the European Union primarily, which means better quality, consistency in the quality, to change the mind of doing the business. If before they were working, the farmers, with Russians only with cash, without even thinking about the proper storages and shipment, now they are doing business with European companies. Now they know how to write an invoice, how to work with the contracts, how to work with the transfers, and how to really deal properly with all the goods that they are exporting. So it's changing completely, and today we have more than 65% of exports to the European Union market. This is a complete change. It's not only about exports now. We are talking about in many other areas. But it took 4 years. Unfortunately, during all these 4 years, we also had a crisis in the banking sector. We had crisis at the political level because of the frauds and in the banking sector, because of the corruption scandals. But still, life is moving on, and the transformations in the country as well. And it's every day, every month, every year, better and better. Comparing to Georgia, unfortunately, in Moldova, we don't have such a unique situation, I would say, comparing to many European countries, as you said, and more than 90% of population is pro-Europe. In Moldova, still the society is divided because of the influence of the Russians, because of the influence of the TV channels and the Russian media, not only, but it's also changing every day. Now in Moldova, we have more than 60% already of the population thinking and being pro-European. And also because of the free regime of European Union related to the visa regime. Moldovans are already traveling for quite 3 years to European Union. That means a lot. Without visa to travel, to pick up a plane and to fly to Vienna, to Rome, to London, to see other experiences, to exchange experience, and this is changing the mentality. And we have really young generation of people which already they forgot how to speak to Russian language. So the country is changing. And answering to your question, maybe some of the Western countries are a little bit tired of the Eastern Partnership. They are maybe tired of what is happening in Georgia and Ukraine and Moldova. But we are talking about future generations. We are talking about population of almost 100 of millions, which they really want to live in a free world. So don't let us down. The Western countries should understand it takes time. So to stay engaged, to stay focused, to ask more for more, to give us more for more. As we have a principle now that we are working with European Union, we do more good things and we have more achievements, we get more for the European Union. And that's good. It's much better like this to work, and because we are better in mobilizing all the forces and the institutions to work better. So to stay engaged, to come with the support, to come with the experience, takes time to build institutions, takes time to build the law, the rule of law. Because, for example, because of the gap in law, we have now this problem with the early elections in the city hall of Chisinau that we will talk about. So it's to stay engaged. I was given an example by a friend speaker from a previous speaker from Romania who was saying, "Look, Andrian, what is the difference between West and East? When it's something to solve an issue in the West, there is an institution and there is a law. When it's to solve something or to find a way of doing something in the East, you usually pick up the phone and you call. Because the influence of the invested interests are higher. So we have to move from all this mentality and way of being from the East style to the West style. But unfortunately, this cannot be done over the night.
So just say a few words. There is a crisis now with people out on the streets in Chisinau who are upset that a democratic election for the mayor was annulled by the courts on what many people see as a technicality. That the candidate, the pro-Western candidate, was on Facebook encouraging his supporters to come out and vote during the period of so-called electoral silence. A lot of people are upset about this. Talk about what this means for Moldova's image and how you deal with this concrete problem and get beyond it. Because like you, I have seen the progress over the years. It is tremendous, especially with the younger generation. But it's also that younger generation that is out there on the streets right now.
It's true, Michael. This came like a blow to everybody. Nobody was expecting actually such kind of decisions from the courts. I will not refer to the legal issues, technicalities. It seems that the law provides this prohibition that during the silence day before the elections and during elections, it's not allowed to make any campaign. Now, the question is not about the decision of the court, because if we want to build a country where the rule of law and the law should stay above, then we should not discuss the judgments, but to execute them. Now it's a lesson to learn from. We have to, and there are already some initiatives, and we are thinking of setting up a special committee in the parliament to analyze the legislation, election legislation, and to fix all those gaps and to fill in with proper interpretation and proper legislation so nothing like this is happening before, because it seems that there is a disproportionality between the actions and the sanctions. So it's not to blame the courts which they apply the law. It's to blame the legislation itself, it has already years and years. Nobody was expecting that something like this can happen, that during elections people are really campaigning on the social media or TV, wherever, does not matter. Maybe we should come to a solution like in many other Western countries. If I'm not wrong, in the United States you can campaign even during the day of elections. Nothing wrong in this. Maybe we should take some experience also from other countries, and to fix the problem in the legislation so nothing like this is happening, specifically in the parliamentary elections, which are very soon to follow.
Thank you. Speaker Parubi, when people in Western capitals talk about Ukraine, they talk about Russian aggression, but the other topic they often mention is corruption. And over the last 4 years since the Maidan Revolution, which was fundamentally a revolution against kleptocracy and authoritarianism, you have stood up a number of anti-corruption institutions, a National Anti-Corruption Bureau, a special prosecutor for anti-corruption matters, and now, under your leadership, a new law was passed to establish in the future an anti-corruption court. With these three institutions, you will have an ability within the judicial system and law enforcement to tackle corruption. Talk about why this is important. I've heard you speak very eloquently about corruption, not just as a drag on economic growth, but fundamentally as a national security issue. Can you speak about the trajectory that you've come on in the last couple of years and why it's so important to the sovereignty of your country?
Дякую за питання. Я справді вважаю, що питання боротьби з корупцією – це питання і національної безпеки і оборони.
And in fact, I do think that fighting corruption is a national security issue for us.
Я колись жартував, що корупційні угрупування – це диверсійні групи Путіна.
And once I said, in kind of joking way, that the corruption groups are really subversive groups organized by Putin.
Бо вони розкладають країну зсередини.
Because they work to decompose the country from the inside.
Бо вони сіють зневіру між владою і народом.
And they sow discord between the government and the people.
Але теж я хочу сказати, що ті кроки, які Україна зробила в боротьбі з корупцією, я би сказав, є безпрецедентними.
But I would also like to point out that the steps that have been taken by Ukraine in order to fight corruption are unprecedented.
Як ви згадали, ми створили незалежний орган НАБУ,
As you've said, we've created an independent National Anti-Corruption Bureau,
спеціалізовану антикорупційну прокуратуру,
a specialized anti-corruption prosecutor's office.
і кілька днів тому, після річної дискусії, ми проголосували за закон про Вищий антикорупційний суд.
And several days ago, following a year-long debate in the parliament, we adopted an act on the anti-corruption court.
Ми маємо систему електронного декларування. Я вивчав це питання, і я вам скажу, напевно, найбільш відкриту у світі.
And we have an electronic system for asset declaration for public servants. And I have studied that issue very carefully. It seems to be it's one of the most open, one of the most transparent in the world.
Відкриті реєстри всіх бюджетних закупівель.
Also, we have open registers which are available online of all public procurement.
Для всієї цієї інфраструктури було важливо створення спеціалізованого антикорупційного суду.
And in order to make all that infrastructure work, it was very important also to have the anti-corruption court.
І ми близько року, на моє запрошення, приїхали експерти Венеційської комісії, і ми з ними розробляли концепцію закону.
And it took us about a year, and we worked on the conceptual framework and then on the details of that legislation together with the experts with the Venice Commission, and it took about a year.
Я хочу сказати, що в результаті усі рекомендації Венеційської комісії були враховані в законі.
And as a result, all the recommendations, all of them from the Venice Commission have been taken into consideration and introduced into legislation.
Остання суперечка це було про вплив Громадської ради міжнародних експертів на вибір суддів.
So the last debating point was about the influence of the International Commission of Experts on the selection process for the judges of the court.
Багато хто з політиків українських говорив, це втручання в українські справи, ми не можемо цього робити.
Many Ukrainian politicians said that this is about interference into Ukraine's domestic affairs. We cannot do that.
Ми дозволяємо громадянам іноземних держав впливати на формування однієї з гілок влади судової.
We allow citizens of other countries to influence the processes in one of our branches of government, the judiciary branch.
Але тим не менше ми провели цю норму в законі.
Nevertheless, we introduced that norm into our legislation.
І забезпечили, наголошую ще раз, безпрецедентний вплив міжнародних експертів на вибори суддів антикорупційного суду.
Let me emphasize again, so we have provided for an unprecedented level of influence for international experts to affect the selection process of the judges of the court.
Чи залишається в Україні корупція? Очевидно.
So is corruption still there in Ukraine? Of course it is.
Це величезний спадок ще від Радянського Союзу.
This is a big heritage that we have inherited from the Soviet Union.
Який як рак роз'їв усе суспільство.
And it's like cancer. It's working to kill the whole, to go through all the society, the texture of society.
Але ключове питання, чи робить уряд, чи робить керівництво, чи робить Верховна Рада рішучі кроки для того, щоб це явище знищити.
But the key issue is whether the Ukrainian leadership, its government and parliament is doing all it can to root out that phenomenon.
Я стверджую, можу сказати, так, і президент, і уряд, і Верховна Рада.
And I can firmly say yes, the president and the government and the Verkhovna Rada.
Я наведу вас один приклад.
Let me give you one example.
Де було найбільше, скажімо, таке гніздо корупції в Україні?
So one of the hotbeds of corruption in Ukraine was
В енергетичному секторі на темі закупівлі російського газу.
Was in the energy sector and in Russian natural gas procurement.
Це називали в Україні бізнес прем'єрів і президентів.
So it was nicknamed in Ukraine the business for presidents and for prime ministers.
Де підписували угоди наперед, визначаючи, який відсоток йде в Росію, який відсоток йде Україні, певним людям.
And when signing agreements, so in those agreements it was kind of implied what kicks back would go to what people in Ukraine.
Газ був спосіб не тільки політичного тиску, а ще й корумпування української влади.
So this natural gas issue was not only an instrument of political pressure, but also an instrument to corrupt Ukraine.
Станом на сьогодні ми вже близько 2,5 років взагалі не купуємо російського газу, а закуповуємо тільки газ сховищ Західної Європи.
As of today, it's more than 2 years that we don't buy any Russian natural gas, but we buy natural gas coming from the Western Europe sources.
То це велике гніздо корупції є просто знищено.
So that hotbed of corruption has been wiped out.
Чому для Росії так важливо такий проект, як Північний потік-2?
So why then is this Nord Stream 2 project is so important for Russia?
І ці кроки є в багатьох сферах.
And also, so these steps, also are taking place in other areas.
Ми знаємо, які кроки треба ще зробити.
Of course, we are aware of more steps to be taken.
Нам треба зробити приватизацію держпідприємств,
So we have privatized, state-run, state-owned enterprises.
де ще лишилися заховані старі схеми.
So where there are old corruption schemes still in operation.
І ми зараз працюємо над тим.
And we are now working on that.
Я сприймаю будь-яку критику щодо України в тому напрямку.
So I understand and I appreciate any criticism
You
coming our way in this area.
І я часто дискутую з нашими європейськими друзями, які говорять, вас повільно йдуть реформи.
And I often argue with my European friends who say that, look, your reforms are progressing very slowly.
Я їм навожу приклад. Тільки за останні 9 місяців
And I tell them, look, during the past 9 months,
в Україні була прийнята масштабна медична реформа.
so we have had a very large-scale healthcare reform.
До речі, за американським зразком.
It's according to the American model.
У вас, наскільки я знаю, дискусії ще тривають.
As far as I know, your healthcare debate is still ongoing.
Була прийнята пенсійна реформа,
Then
цілковито з
we
рекомендацій МВФ.
adopted a large-scale pension reform,
Була прийнята освітня реформа.
also an educational reform,
Масштабна судова реформа, яка перезагружає суди.
and also very large-scale judicial reform, which really resets the whole system.
Ми вже говорили про антикорупційний суд, як
Супер.
інституцію, яка, до речі, в Європі аналогії має тільки Хорватія і Болгарія, якщо я не помиляюся.
And also the anti-corruption court, and I think in Europe it seems like, if I'm not mistaken, just Croatia and Bulgaria that have this kind of institution.
І далеко не з такими повноваженнями, які ми заклали в Україні.
And on those countries with much less mandate that we have built into the
Я
system.
нагадаю ще один масштабний закон, про який не згадували.
So let me remind you one more very important piece of legislation which we haven't yet mentioned.
Закон про національну безпеку,
The
який ми
law
прийняли рівно тиждень тому, в четвер.
On national security, which was adopted in Ukraine exactly one week ago, last Thursday.
Масштабний закон, над яким працювали кілька років.
So it is a very big piece of legislation, and it took us several years to work it out.
Загальний огляд безпеки ми розпочинали ще коли я був секретарем Ради національної безпеки і оборони.
So when I was Secretary of National Security and Defense Council 4 years ago, so we started this overview of our national security legislation.
Який реформує не тільки реформує сектор безпеки, а фактично приводить його уніфікацію стандартами НАТО.
And this law is not just about reforming the security sector, but also bring it into alignment with the NATO standards.
І ми усі, які були рекомендації НАТО, були в законі враховані, всі до єдиної.
And all the recommendations that our NATO colleagues have provided, so all of them have been taken into consideration.
І сприймаючи будь-яку критику, я питаю європейських колег,
And now, so understanding or receiving this criticism coming from my European colleagues, I keep asking them,
назвіть мені ще одну країну, будь-де в світі,
could you name another country anywhere in the world
які в такий період провели таку кількість масштабних реформ?
which has managed in such a short period of time has succeeded in having so many reforms?
Це при тому, що нам доводиться кожного дня відбивати агресію однієї з найбільших мілітарних потуг світу.
While at the same time, on a daily basis, having to fight off and withstand the aggression of one of the most powerful military powers in the world.
Більше 5% ВВП йде на безпеку і оборону.
And now over 5% of our GDP is devoted to the security and defense sector.
Назвіть мені ще одну країну. в Європі, яка таку кількість вкладає в безпеку і оборону.
So if you could you really name a country in Europe which has so much expenditure for their defense?
Україна велика країна.
Ukraine is a big country.
Це великий корабель.
It's a big ship.
Можливо, не так швидко він рухається, як би хотілося.
Maybe it's not going as fast as we want it to be,
Але наш авіаносець йде в правильному напрямку.
but its course is in the right direction.
Thank you. I think we'll open it up now for questions. So why don't we take a few at once? Is there a microphone? Great. So why don't we do the gentleman here?
Одночасно.
Thank you very much, Paul Joyle, NSI. I'd like to follow up on Mr. Carpenter's question to you, Mr. Speaker. I received a remarkable phone call from Tbilisi yesterday, who explained to me that you are, if I'm correct, broadcasting live your hearings related to the investigation into the events of the unfortunate deaths of the high school students. And what the person remarked to me was they could not believe the types of questions that were being asked and the revelations of the shoddy investigation that took place during the time. Who was behind, were you behind, or who was behind the decision to go public in such a remarkable fashion with an ongoing investigation into these events? Thank you.
Okay, well, why don't we let you answer that, and then we'll take a couple more. Go ahead.
Sure. Okay.
Please.
Yeah. Again, we have made this decision about the establishment of the investigation commission, and it was another decision to give the possibility to the opposition to lead the process in the investigation commission. Now they have a majority in the investigation commission, and they can decide about the procedures inside. And finally, the final say has, of course, the leadership of the parliament. It was finally the decision of the commission itself, and also the parliamentary decision to make these hearings public. Of course, it's a quite inconvenient case because it's about the children. The victims are the children, and also the possible murderers are the children. So that's why we have to hide the names of the victims and the other participants of this case. But finally, it was important for us to do everything publicly in order to ensure that the general public has proper information about this case. It was important for us to demonstrate that we have nothing to hide. It is in our primary interest to investigate this case. Again, the Prosecutor General stepped back as soon as there was a doubt about the proper investigation of this case, and we granted the whole possibility to the opposition to investigate it. It demonstrates the openness of the parliament, of the government in general, and we are hopeful that this commission will finally give answers on all the questions which are related to this very specific case.
Great. So we've got 5 minutes left. Let's take 2 questions. So gentleman back there with the sunglasses.
Hi, so I actually have 2 questions. So the government of Moldova.
You get 1.
Okay. Well then, so there are 2. We'll switch to Georgia then. There are 2 pieces of of legislation currently related to Georgia in the House. H.R. 4563 reaffirms the United States' intention to sanction the government of Georgia if it undermines contractual agreements with U.S. companies. And HRES 576 reaffirms the U.S.'s strategic partnership with Georgia and supports its territorial integrity. In light of both of these, what's the Georgian government doing to address the growing concerns about the investment climate in Georgia? Thank you.
Great. And does anyone have questions for our Ukrainian or Moldovan guests? Yes, here.
A general question.
Okay, please go ahead.
Hi, Genta Poldenskis, West Virginia State University. I have a question with regard to the occupied territories that each one of you has, and in what way are you working through international organizations to support your efforts to regain your territory and, in some cases, prevent Russia from continuing to move borders and encroach further on your territories?
Great, thank you. Okay, we've got about 3 minutes left, so please.
Кожна з наших країн має окремий процес і окремий дипломатичний майданчик по вирішенню проблем окупованих територій.
Each of our countries has specific problems and specific diplomatic platforms for addressing this issue of occupied territories.
Але наш союз, в тому числі, це і відповідь на цю проблему.
But our present union here is also a kind of answer to this question.
Одного дня Андріан сказав дуже важливу річ.
So one day Andrian said a very important thing.
Ми бачимо, як ви працюєте з Мінськими угодами.
So he said, look, we see the way you're working on the Minsk agreements.
Якщо ви підете на надто великі компроміси, це доведеться і нам потім за тою шкалькою йти на ці компроміси.
And he said, look, if there's too much compromise and you go for too much compromise of this, then we'll be forced to do the same afterwards.
Тому що така сама матриця буде накладена і на Грузію, і на Молдову.
Because the same kind of model or matrix then will be overlaid on Moldova and Georgia.
Я зрозумів особливу відповідальність України.
And then I understood the special responsibility of Ukraine in this respect.
І зрозумів, що попри кількість майданчиків, на яких йде дискусія,
And I understood that in spite of a great number of platforms on which various debates take place,
є одна уніфікована відповідь наших трьох країн.
so there is one single answer that can be provided by our three countries.
Путін має піти з наших країн.
So Putin must go.
Він повинен забрати війська з наших країн.
So he must take away his troops.
І багато дипломатів розмов навколо – це таке заведення часто в блуд і в якісь манівці.
And of course, a lot of diplomatic double talk about all this.
Російські
Is
війська,
sometimes about hiding the real truth.
російські війська мають піти.
So Russian troops should go.
І весь вільний світ має змусити Путіна забрати свої війська.
And the free world, the whole free world, must force Putin to withdraw his troops
Щоб ціна для нього була надто велика.
and to make the price that he pays great.
Я можу вам сказати з повною гарантією. Наші країни цілковито дадуть ради з тими територіями, які сьогодні є окупованими, коли російські війська підуть.
And let me assure you, as soon as the Russian troops get out, so our countries will settle everything in those territories very quickly.
Well, in the case of Moldova, we have an international format already for Transnistria issues. It's called 5+2, where the members are Russia, Ukraine, OSCE, United States, European Union, plus, of course, the parties, Moldova and the so-called Transnistria region. So this format works every year. There are high-level meetings, and almost every month there are discussions, bilateral discussions on different issues. Now we focus mainly, for the last 2-3 years, we mainly focus on people-to-people solutions. But in case of the territories and the army forces, sometimes what cannot be achieved on the international level, we try on the regional level. And for example, we did not succeed for the last 25 years, but we succeeded last year and we continue this year, is the cooperation with Ukraine to control the border of Moldova, eastern border of Moldova, which we did not control for 25 years. And therefore, it was agreed between our countries to open the common checkpoints of the border control on the territory of Ukraine. So in this way, we can control the territory. We can fight against traffic of weapons, traffic of smugglers, and to avoid the danger that the so-called Russian forces, the Russian troops on the Transnistrian territory, they don't move into Ukraine, to Odessa region, Mariupol, to cut in this way Ukraine from the Black Sea. And I think it's coming the time, because of the occupied territories that we have for a long period of time, to think about why not compensations, financial compensations. Let's Russia assume then financial compensations. Maybe it's the case to assess the damage that all three countries we have for the occupied territories. And beside our everyday actions and also the support from international level to withdraw the military forces from our three countries, it's also to seek for recovery of the damages.
As I mentioned, we are observing quite negative trend in both occupied regions, and it is not easy for our partners, for our strategic partners, including the international organizations, to address this problem. We are applying one specific format of negotiations with the Russian Federation, which is the so-called Geneva format, and the international stakeholders are involved in this format. But also in this case, the Russian Federation does its best in order to make this format ineffective. So it's not really easy for us, for our international partners, to be effective in terms of ensuring the proper monitoring of the process or improve the situation. There is only one mission, that is the EU monitoring mission, which does the monitoring in both occupied regions. But even for them, it is impossible to enter the region and to do this monitoring in the regions itself. So finally, the Russian Federation is kind of quite effectively hindering the progress in terms of monitoring, in terms of achieving the better situation in the occupied regions. Again, we have the negative trend in terms of human rights protection. For example, it was possible for children in Abkhazia and Tkhinvali region, for Georgians, to get education in Georgian language a few years ago even, and now it is getting impossible for them, which means that even for children, the basic human rights are not protected. They don't speak any other languages. It means that they cannot get any education at all. So the most important basic human rights of the children are not protected. I'm not talking anything about the kidnapping, about the killing of people, which happens on a regular basis both in Abkhazia and Tkhinvali region. So we are facing serious problems. But again, it is not easy for us. It is not easy for strategic partners to be successful in our efforts. We are pursuing a policy which is called the pragmatic policy towards the Russian Federation, and with this policy we managed to somehow stabilize the situation in the country, but that's the maximum achievement with regard to the overall situation that we have considering the problem with the occupation. The second question was related to the business environment. And we are proud of the good business environment which has been created during the last years in our country. We are number 9 on the list of doing business, which is done by the World Bank. We are number 9 out of 190 countries in the world, so it is quite easy to do business in Georgia. We have created a proper environment to do business properly in our country. Of course, there are some particular cases where the business companies are complaining, and there was a reference about one of the cases. We have had the discussion. It's about one of the American companies, and we have had several discussions with our colleagues from the Congress about this case, and we had a very clear response about this case. The company had an opportunity to refer to the international arbitration to the Stockholm arbitration. Initially, the company refused to do so, to refer to this arbitration, but finally they made this complaint to the arbitration, and finally the case will be decided by the Stockholm arbitration. So also in this case, there was a contract, and everyone was acting according to the contract. If there will be some irregularities in this case, so finally arbitration will decide about this particular case. But in general, again, we are proud of our reforms in the field of economy, in the field of business, and again, we are one of the most advanced countries in our region in terms of economic environment. And one thing I would like to add to that is that the economic development is one of the, or maybe even the most crucial aspect of development of our countries. The countries with weak economies are much more vulnerable than the countries with stronger economies. You have mentioned the problems in early 90s, and by that time our GDP per capita was around 500 USD, and that was one of the factors to which our problems were related. Our GDP per capita is now around 4,500 USD. We are 10 times weaker compared to the Western European countries or the United States. and the poorest EU country is doing twice better compared to Georgia. And of course, it creates specific challenges, and that's why I think that the support of the international community to countries like Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine should be very strongly focused on economic development. It will take around 10 years for Georgia to achieve the kind of minimum European standard of economic development, which means that the challenges will remain. The challenges will remain also in terms of democracy, in terms of facing the foreign aggression. So that's why it is quite important to accelerate the economic growth in our countries. Again, it will take around 10 years to achieve the minimum European standard of economic development and to eliminate the poverty, ensure the full-scale elimination of poverty in our country, which means that acceleration of economic growth is particularly important for us, again, to face the domestic problems and challenges, but also to face the foreign aggression challenges at the same time.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our time. Thank you very much for coming. Please join me in thanking our three speakers of parliament for participating.